Hello, this is Dylan Moore with iReadIt.tv, and today is Wednesday, December 8th, 2021, and we have here again Dr. E. Michael Jones, author over at Culture Wars magazine at culturewars.com, and author of many large, fascinating books, one of which that I have right here, Barren Metal, a History of Capitalism as the conflict between labor and usury, which is going to be serving as the basis of our conversation today. And before we get into that, I wanted to let everyone know how you can follow us. So if you go over to iReadIt.tv, we're at the top of the site, it'll show all the social media that we're available on. We're still on the old censorship-friendly sites still, although we are starting to get censored. So if you want to follow us and get everything that we're releasing, we're on a plethora of different new tech sites, new tech social media, and whichever one that you're on, likely we're on it too. And so if you go to iReadIt.tv, you'll find us there. So first and foremost, Dr. Jones, thank you very much for coming back on the show today.
You're welcome.
And then also, of course, I shouldn't fail to mention we have Nima Majur, co-host and co-partner at iReadIt.tv. And we're going to be talking...
Pleasure. And it's December 8th, by the way.
Isn't that what I said?
Oh, I must have missed it.
Okay, you made me think that I got the wrong day. Okay, so Dr. Jones, you mentioned something in our last call, which was great. Everybody, we had a lot of positive feedback and a lot of people asking to come back. Is that you mentioned this one little clip that I jumped onto, that economics is basically pseudo-physics. And that sounded just too darn interesting to not have a follow-up conversation about that. And so I've been reading the chapters in your book that you suggested that I read, and to get an idea about it, and it was quite eye-opening. I would recommend anybody to read this book. And I've got an idea where to start based on what I read in your book, but obviously I think it's better to come from you. And if we start with this very bizarre-sounding statement to someone who's not expecting it, that economics is pseudo-physics, where's the best place to begin to start talking about this?
The best place is to start with Newton and the kind of cosmic revolution, or the revolution in terms of viewing the cosmos that he brought about with his Principia Mathematica. So we're talking about the middle toward the end of the 17th century in England, revolutionary period. Newton was at Cambridge during the Revolution, was a Whig, supporter of the Whig Party, and remained faithful to that political allegiance for his entire life. Within a century, the whole definition of economics had changed. So when Newton is at the university, economics was part of philosophy, and it was in particular part of moral philosophy. And that's the way it stayed for another century, all the way up to the time of Adam Smith. Mm-hmm. Adam Smith was hired at the University of Edinburgh to teach moral philosophy, and economics was part of what you taught there. For obvious reasons, okay? The obvious reason being that when you come down to the fundamental, the basic atom of economics, it is basically two people coming together, one with a person with something to sell and the other person with money wanting to buy something. That relationship is the heart of economics. And because it is a relationship in which both men are seeking to achieve the good, it's part of moral philosophy. It's a moral framework that we're talking about here. Because of that fact, there will always be a tendency to exploit the situation on the part of the stronger person. It's not as easy to see in the market where it's just goods. So if you're going through the marketplace and the price of potatoes is too high at this stall, you just pass on by and go to the next stall and hope they have potatoes there. But that situation could change dramatically if there's only one guy who sells potatoes or flour, and you have to go to him. and he has control of the market. And because he has control of the market, he's going to exploit that situation. And that was something, when it comes to necessities, the church always defined as sinful. Exploiting, there was a just price. It was based on production. The just price included room for profit, but you could not extort people because of the power you had in the market. The situation where that's most apparent is when it comes to labor, because in a situation like this, the employer always has the upper hand over the employee. Even in times of labor shortage. The example would be the Black Plague. Speaking of plagues, we're now in a COVID plague. But the net result, the net result of that was that wages went up because 40% of the population of Europe died. So there was a labor shortage. So supply and demand went that wages went up. This was always a problem. Okay. And I begin the book with a discussion of Florence, beginning in the 14th century and then into the 15th century, where it became crucial, and focused on the Medici family, who got wealthy because of cloth production. They had set, Italy was the leader of the world in everything at that point. It was the leader in terms of the creation of double entry bookkeeping. The Fugger family, the Germans, would go to Venice to the school there, and they'd learn all these advanced techniques in terms of economics. It was the most advanced place in the world when it came to art and painting, which I just cover in my most recent book, The Dangers of Beauty, music, everything. All you have to do is think of Shakespeare's admiration for Italy. You have some sense of the way this Italy was viewed at this time. The problem here is that the Medici family did not value labor. Now, this was in many ways a violation of the whole tradition that had arisen out of the Roman Empire under the tutelage of the Catholic Church. The Roman Empire was based on usury and slavery. And those two things go together like ham and eggs. The more usury you have in an economy, the more you drive independent contractors to the wall, and they lose everything because they go into debt, and the usurer takes their collateral, and they end up being slaves. And this is what happened to the latifundia. The latifundia were these huge agricultural estates that were run by slaves because the independent farmer had disappeared over the course of the Roman Empire. When the empire fell, the Catholic Church took it over, and the Catholic Church had an understanding of the human being, the worth of the human being, that was much exponentially different than what existed in the Roman Empire. And the people who understood this best were the Benedictines, who took over the course of civilization, saved civilization during this period of time of the barbarian invasions. And their motto was ora et labora, work and pray. Now, Greece preceded Rome as one of the greatest intellectual achievements in human history. And I wrote the book Logos Rising about the word logos and how that developed at that time. But the Greeks had no understanding of the value of labor. None. Aristotle said, if you had to work for a living, you could not be a citizen of Athens because you had to attend meetings every day. It was like a university. Every day it's full of meetings where you're trying to come up with decisions about policy. Okay. If you had to work, you couldn't do it. So that meant that the work had to be done by slaves, which meant that it was inferior. It wasn't worthy of human dignity. And this sort of comes out in a kind of Plato's worldview where the real world is up there in the realm of forms, and this world is nothing but chaos. All of that changed with the incarnation, and what changed as well was the value of human labor. And so you had the Benedictine motto, which is ora et labora, work and pray. And these are the people who taught my barbarian German ancestors how to work. And if you were fortunate, as I was, I rowed down the Danube in a boat with a bunch of other Germans, and you could see the one Benedictine monastery after another, surrounded by orchards, vineyards, the teaching the German tribes that you didn't have to subsist by chasing pigs through the forest and eating gamey wild boar. You could switch to agriculture and so on and so forth. That heritage grew for 1,000 years. And I've said before that the difference between Tanzania, between the Diocese of Mbinga and the Diocese of Würzburg is 1,000 years of learning how to work. That's the difference between Africa and Germany. And Germany has a very skilled workforce because they understood the value of labor, which they got from the Benedictines. So to get back to the Medici did not know this. Italy was not noted, even though it was a deeply Catholic culture. It didn't value labor. And Florence was a classic example of where the working class, where you found out the limits of what you can do. And what the limit is, the ultimate limit, and we got this in Catholic social teaching of wages, is the family wage. If you simply turn wages into a commodity, human labor into a commodity, there will be a race to the bottom because the employee is always weaker than the employer, and the employer will always play one worker off against another, and you'll be desperate, and you'll end up working for less than you need to survive. That's a starvation wage. But before you get to that, there's a crucial place, a red line you cannot cross, and that is the family wage, which is the basis of the economy, the Christian economy. And why do I say the family wage? Because of what happened in Florence during this period of time. The wages were so low that the people stopped having children. And when they stopped having children, in one generation, you don't have a workforce. And if you don't have a workforce, that's the end of your economy. And so what happened over this period of time is that they tried all sorts of artificial measures to prop this up. The workers in Florence were not allowed to strike. They were not allowed to organize. They were not allowed to leave and go to another city, state, and share their skills. And so the whole thing just died on the vine. And I don't know what the causality here was, but the Medici then went from being manufacturers of cloth to being bankers. And so they went from labor to usury. And once you go to usury, it's the end. You're in the death spiral for your economy. At this point, Florence became what it is today, which is a museum. Beautiful museum with lots of beautiful art, but it's not a manufacturing powerhouse. Okay, certainly not that, because they did not pay the family wage, and after a while, there were no children. Also, so you end up in the death spiral here in Florence, and what do you see? What is the characteristic of a culture that's about to die? Sodomy and usury. That's what turned out to be in Florence. That's what it is in our culture right now. It's obvious that we are in a death spiral here. The American empire is in a death spiral because this has replaced labor, sodomy, and usury. I don't know why they're connected. Dante saw the connection. He put sodomites and usurers. Dante was also from Florence. Put sodomites and usurers in the ninth circle of hell because the usurer takes what is sterile, namely money, and tries to make it fertile through usury or interest. And the sodomite takes what is fertile, namely sex, and renders it sterile by homosexual activity. So you had this point. They had their great moment, a possibility of reform when Savonarola showed up. There was repentance across the board. Botticelli, who was basically the artist who was the propagandist for Lorenzo the Magnificent de Medici, for his regime, threw what were probably pornographic pictures onto the bonfire of the vanities. I cover this in the art book, but eventually the sodomites, the usurers, and the Pope turned against Savonarola. He was murdered, and that was the end of that possibility of reform. The next reform is known as the Reformation, which was not a reform at all. So I'm saying This is the kind of background that we're saying. The turning point at this point came after Protestantism had established itself in Europe as a result of the Reformation. England was a bastion of Protestant thought. There was revolution there, and eventually Newton came up with a new form of the universe, a new description of the universe, which would eventually supplant the old classical understanding of the universe. And the crucial point here was his basic resurrection of pagan philosophy under the guise of science. So what we're talking about here is the philosophy of Empedocles, who said that all motion in the universe was either love or strife. And you put love and strife together, attraction and repulsion together, and you get circular motion. And at that point, the universe becomes a machine. And this is precisely what Newton did. He, instead of love and strife, he called it inertia and gravity. Gravity is love. Inertia is strife. You put those two things together, you get circular motion. That becomes a machine. That basically bans providence, which is God's intervention into the universe, bans it, removes it. It's not necessary because the universe functions all by itself now. It goes around and around in circles all by itself. We don't need that hypothesis anymore. And that set up basically the rise of England as a world power. Now, I'm saying that Newton didn't get the idea. There are two things. There's the inverse square law, okay, which is, yeah, that's true. I don't think he came up with it. I think someone else did. And I cover that in the book. But it's true. There's no disputing that. But it becomes cover for basically the reimportation of pagan cosmology into the universe. And pagan cosmology means the banning of providence, which suddenly now there's no God up there anymore. And the man who completed this cycle was Adam Smith. Adam Smith was hired as a professor of moral philosophy. So when he started off, it was still, economics was still within the realm of moral philosophy. But then he wrote his Wealth of Nations, and that was a pure Newtonian book. And so basically what he took was, okay, it's not gravity and inertia, it's competition and self-interest. But it's the same system. And again, once again, you have a system where the whole point of it is you don't need to intervene. So just as God can't intervene in the Newtonian universe, now the moral agent does not intervene in the Adam Smith's economic world. And that, I think, that's why I'm saying that at this point, beginning with Smith and then following the 19th century, physics, economics became bad physics.
Can you talk about the relationship? Because this was totally fascinating to me when I read the chapters of the book. So you talked about Empedocles and how these ideas originally came from Empedocles. Well, you also talked about how Newton came across these ideas, or likely came across these ideas from Empedocles, which is Newton was a serious alchemist.
Right. The last alchemist. Yes, that's absolutely right.
And I didn't realize how serious it was until you started laying out, like, you know, how much mercury was found in his body and how many alchemy books were found in on his shelf, and the connections he was able to make from being in the alchemy club. And the question I have is, why was alchemy so fundamental to Newton creating his cosmology?
I think, well, first of all, because of Empedocles. I'm saying because this was his vehicle where alchemy was his access to pagan thought. Mm-hmm. So the same thing happened in Florence. Basically, Cosimo de' Medici had the Hermetic text translated into Latin. Ficino did that for him. And this was the reintroduction of pagan thought into Christian Italy after over 1,000 years of Christianity. So it became the vehicle for Empedocles. I think that's one reason why it was important. but I think it also shows what he was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a man who had a disinterested appreciation of the truth. He was in it for financial gain. So when the Whigs created their bank, he was the guy who did the coinage. He was the guy who basically reissued the coins. He was a usurer himself at the university. He would lend out money to his fellow students. He was a very unpleasant guy, like the classic academic schemer, who's always trying to take credit, stealing other people's ideas, trying to take credit, trying to build up his resume, he was very successful. But I think that alchemy was central to what he was doing. He spent more time on alchemy than he did on mathematics. Now, why was that? Well, I think because he was wanting gold, because that's what alchemy is about. It's basically transmuting lead into gold. And just to put the whole English Enlightenment into perspective, you mentioned the fact he was having experiments. Mercury is a crucial element in this regard because it's a transition between like liquid and solid, and it had all sorts of occult properties. But he and Locke, the pillars of the English Enlightenment, were engaging in alchemical experiments in his apartment, which led to, I think, to lead poisoning. And I think he went slightly crazy at a certain point. He did go slightly crazy, and he had 40 times the lead in his body.
You mean mercury?
I'm sorry, mercury. 40 times the mercury in his body of the average citizen of the 20th century. So that's a lot of mercury. And the whole point of the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland is he used mercury to create hats. That's why they were all crazy, because they were all suffering from mercury poison. That's the reason I think that alchemy was important, because he was more interested in political power and financial gain than he was in the truth.
So, and then I didn't realize what alchemy was until I read your book. And I mean, I knew it was about how to transmute lead into gold, but this idea that the alchemists believed that there was only one metal, which was gold, and all other metals were just like this abortive attempt by the earth to make gold. And that because mercury if you mix mercury with different metals, it makes them shinier. And in a lot of cases, it makes them gold colored. That the mercury was the spirit that got imbued into the metal that wants to be gold anyway, and allowed it to convert itself into gold. And you mentioned in the book as well that this was the exoteric description of alchemy, right? Where this is what they wrote down. This isn't what they told to each other. And what they likely told to each other was, this is literally just about deception. How do we trick people into thinking that we made gold? Do I have that right?
Yeah, the alchemist, the actual alchemist in the Middle Ages had all kinds of tricks to dupe gullible princes into giving him precious metals. So how much precious metal do you have? How much gold do you have? Well, you give me that and I'll double it. So how do I know you're going to do this? Well, he'd have like a pot with a false bottom, and there would be a thin layer of something or other on top of it. And he'd heat this pot, and then suddenly that thin layer would disappear, would evaporate, and there would be gold. Well, it's the gold you put there. He didn't turn it into gold. So there's all kinds of trickery going on here. Now, the crucial fact here is that it's George Soros who said it. He said finance is alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
He said that in the 20th century, and there's an element to that's true. That's true. And what happened over this period of time is that the people had to get away from this kind of attachment to material objects. This is a refinement that took place in philosophy, basically when the first philosopher, Thales, said everything is water. And then Anaxagoras said, no, it's air. And then Heraclitus said it's fire. And at a certain point, they had to transcend all of this and realize that it's logos, which is not a material thing. So something similar had to happen with metal. With money. In the beginning, money was metal. The beginning of money is basically everyone valued gold. Everyone knew that gold was valuable. Everyone desired gold. Okay. So you would take this as a way of getting away from barter, because economic exchange began with barter, but there are problems. Like you have a cow and he has shoes. And how many shoes do you take to make up a cow? Well, that's part. So you can chop the cow up into pound of meat, but that's problematic. So let's have a medium of exchange. Let's have it gold. Okay, that's good. But you're telling me that's an ounce of gold. How do I know you're not lying to me? How do I know you didn't spray paint a piece of lead? Okay. And this is where we have the coin. So the coin is basically, you have the sovereign's image stamped on, let's say, an ounce of gold. The sovereign guarantees that this is what it says it is, an ounce of gold of a certain type of refinement. That is the beginning of the coin. That is the beginning of money. Now, over this period of time, what you had an economy that became so productive that gold was holding it back. And that is the other side of the whole Barren Metal book, is this whole story of gold. Is gold money? There are still people today who think we should go back to the gold standard. You know, there's never enough gold to accommodate human productivity. There's never enough gold. There was, at the time we're talking about, I think the gold was basically a cube of like 6 feet by 6 feet by 6 feet. That was it. It was all came from basically the Roman armies plundering all these places, assembling it in one place. That's all there was. Well, that's not enough to accommodate human productivity. And so as a result, the wages were always being deflated and the economy was always being constricted. So at a certain point, you had to realize that alchemy is, in a sense, true, because you can say that this is money if the sovereign puts his image on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because money is simply a medium of exchange. It is not wealth. All value, human labor is the source of all value. That was the fundamental understanding that was hidden in what the Benedictines were saying about talking about labor. Everybody agrees on it. What do you mean by everybody? Karl Marx said that, and as soon as you say that, everybody says, oh, well, then it must be wrong. Well, John Locke said it, and Adam Smith said it, and they were certainly not Marxists, and Pope John Paul II also said it. They all agree because it's true. The source of value is human labor. And so the result is you don't need a piece of gold as the medium of exchange. What you could have is basically anything. Let's take a piece of paper. As long as the sovereign is backing this up, as long as the sovereign guarantees that this is credit on future labor and that you will be paid off and that you can use this to pay off debts and taxes, it's money. It is money. And the first man who realized this was John Law, a Scotsman who ended up being the finance minister in France, who was spectacularly successful. But what the problem with this is it's not an unlimited free lunch here. You can only issue money to the size of the economy. And the politicians, once they see this is great, we'll just, and they issued too much money and it collapsed and everybody lost faith in it. And they went back to gold. And it took centuries before they really perfected this. That was the realization that liberated the economies. That was what got this started. And it was a spiritualization of an understanding of labor and an understanding of money that it could, in a sense, grow out of alchemy. It could, in a sense, you could create. It's not that you can create gold. You can't create gold, but you can create money. And the only reason you're interested in gold is because it's money. So you could create money. And the guy the literary figure who understood this was Goethe. The part 2 of Faust has long passages about fiat money, where he's trying to meditate on what John Law had done not too far in the past from him. That's why alchemy was important, because in a sense, money is what you would call performative speech. Performative speech is like what the minister does. He says, I now pronounce you man and wife. That's true. It happened because he said it. The ultimate author of performative speech is God. God says, let there be light, and there's light. Money is like that. It's the government saying, this is money. Now, it's not unlimited. It's not without limits, but the government can do this. And this is precisely what liberated the economies to this day. Okay. Great prosperity, but the flaw always is it's going to be usury. The thing that causes the collapse. It's what's causing the collapse right now.
I've got 17 different questions going in my head at once. While these are going through my head, Nima, did you have anything that you wanted to throw in there or ask?
Well, I mean, I think what you just said, Dr. Jones, sort of goes hand in hand with certain things that we've been talking about on this show in regards to gold in particular. Gold was never really necessarily a good medium to facilitate a prosperous economy. It's only ever popped up historically as a medium of exchange in times of severe warfare and strife. In particular, we've discussed the first time gold and silver coinage really became relevant was the Axial Age, I believe, which was around 800 BC to 700 AD or so. And then the other time when gold was very important was the age of the colonial empires, which was from sometime around 1400 AD until around, I believe, 1972 AD, which is when we went off the gold standard. Because gold is so easy in comparison to credit arrangements and credit money, gold is very easy to steal. And so that's what makes it so useful in times where society breaks down and in times of warfare. You can take
right. In times of trouble, gold is a great store of value, and that's supposed to be one of the characteristics of money. It's a terrible medium of exchange. I was in Iran, and there was a contest, an essay contest, and the lady won the contest, and the prize was gold. They gave her 5 gold coins. And so she said, I said, can I see the coins? And she put them in my hand, and my fist immediately closed. I did not want to let go of this gold. This is what happens. It's in the Treasure of the Sierra Madre, if you want to watch that movie. It is a terrible medium of exchange because it's so valuable. I can't hand it over.
Yeah, I was going to say, give that to me.
Give it to me. Give it to me. You don't want to let it out of your hand. It's too valuable. And when trouble comes up and you have inflation, which we're starting to kick in now because they're overprinting the money, for political reasons, you can get that gold, you bury it in your backyard, and it'll be there unless someone else comes with a metal detector and digs it up. So you've got the two aspects of money at war with each other in gold. It's because it's a great store of value. It's a terrible medium of exchange.
Well, and you can always take any coins, whatever sovereign they have stamped on them, you can melt it down and make your own gold out of it. That's what makes it so easy to steal.
That's right. And the other side of the coin, if you'll pardon my pun here, is that the sovereign can take all of the gold and melt it down and mix it with something else and debase the currency. So it's not secure. It is. I don't know why these people think that some type of gold standard is never going to be corrupted. It's corrupted all the time.
From what I've read, the gold standard has always been very popular with bankers because it forces the government to reduce social spending and all these kinds of things, and it creates more demand for bank loans. So that's mostly the reason why in modern times bankers have proposed a favor to gold standard.
Well, there's another reason on top of that, which is by keeping things deflationary. Deflation benefits bankers in the sense that if I lend you out $100 and then the money gets more valuable and you got to pay me $120 back after the interest, you paid me more than $120 back because things deflated.
Yeah.
Austerity.
Yeah. Classic expression of this is Murray Rothbard's book on money, which is basically the Jewish take on money.
Yeah,
and he actually says, this is a direct quote from this book. He says, my ducats swell during periods of deflation.
Oh yeah, that's
now,
right.
This is classic Jewish thinking. The ducat, he's obviously referring to Shylock, that whole talk. But basically what you're saying is, I've got the money, I've got the store of value, and you're going to be miserable.
And that's great for me. Yeah.
That's great for me. The more miserable you are, the better off I am. And that was precise. I cover this in Barren Metal and the whole populist movement in America at the end of the 19th century. So when during the Civil War, they issue greenbacks because they need to print money to fight the war, and the economy prospers because the monetary constraints have been lifted, and the farmer's making $2 a bushel for wheat. 30 years later, he's getting 50 cents a bushel. He's being crushed by the gold standard, by the deflation in the economy, and that led to all sorts of protests. The interim solution some people tried to come up with was silver. William Jennings Bryan did the great speech about not being crucified on a cross of gold. But it's only an interim. It's not going to solve the problem because the amount of silver is going to be finite, just as the amount of gold is. Maybe there's more of it, but there's still finite. And you can't have some type of finite limit to human labor, to human productivity. You can't. Not going to work.
Yeah, we completely agree here. That's definitely something that we've talked about. And another interesting thing about silver, it's an industrial substrate. No, God, what the word is escaping me. They need it in industry to make stuff. It gets used up. So in gold, but most people are buying gold to, like you said, bury it in your backyard. But with silver, people are buying silver because they need it to make stuff. So, another reason why silver probably isn't the best money is that, okay, we created this thing for money, but there's actually industry gobbling it up because they're literally like, the factory's literally eating it.
Volatile.
What's that?
What you do at this point is you bring the whole story full circle.
Mm-hmm.
Whole story, because we started off with moral philosophy, and you have to have an economy that is based on moral principles. And so it turns out that, we don't need this, blah, blah, blah. We go Newtonian physics, blah, blah, blah. And then it turns out, we're going to paper money. Well, then it turns out the main criterion for the successful use of paper money is moral restraint. It's moral restraint on the part of the bank, that the Treasury is not going to overissue money and debase the currency for political reason. Precisely what is going on right now.
Well, and I would even argue it's not even just debasing. It's what you spend it on is huge, right? If we're gonna create a bunch of currency and then hire the unemployed masses to create something useful, we've increased the currency, we've hired labor, we've utilized unused resources, and we've put something productive into the system. If we instead take that money and we give it to vaccine makers and propaganda machines to help vaccines, and then some's going to go to Israel and some's going to go over here, that's all money created for nothing.
Create a horror show.
Yeah.
Right. It's I've said before, it's like sex. Okay. You can, sex is a gift. Munus, it's referred to, munera, it's remunerative. It has relationship to money in that Latin word. You can engage in sterile sex and go to bars and have sex with all women or men or something like that. And at the end, you'll have nothing to show for it. You can do the same thing with money. You can take money and basically go to spend it in bars and getting drunk and blah, 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 and you'll have nothing to show for it. Or you can invest it. And what do I mean by invest? I mean by putting it to productive use.
Yes.
So it's obviously with sex, okay? If you put sex to productive use within marriage, you will end up with children. And if you end up with children, you are creating a little community. And if you raise them right, and if they are, they become moral people too, they will take care of you in your old age. You have built something. The same thing with money. You can get money. I got someone invested in me when I started the magazine, gave me a certain amount of money. I could have spent that money. I could have bought an expensive car with that money. And that would have been in the junkyard by now because It's been 40 years. Okay. This magazine is still supporting us after 40 years because I invested it in labor, my labor, the labor of my mind. And so as a result, it kept returning the investment. This is the type of thing where this is the way we have to think about money. It's something you use. It is better to love God and make use of money than it is to love money and make use of God. That's what St. Augustine said. So there's always this tendency to, I hate this word, fetishize, to turn money into something that has some type of independent existence. It's an instrument, and the only way you will understand to use this instrument properly is by using the moral law, by applying the moral law to it and turning it into a productive investment.
Well, and then I'd like to talk about that moral law. So if we go back to Newton, and again, there was just a ton of details in your book that I had no idea about Newton, is when we look at the sources of where he came up with, like you said, we've got the attractive force, love or gravity, and then we got the strife force, which is inertia, that a very key component was removed from the cosmos when he did this, and this was telos.
Telos, right?
Can you talk about what that was and why it was so bad that got removed?
Telos means an end or a goal. There is no action without a goal. That's true. Okay? Anytime an animal does something, he has some goal in mind. Generally, it's reducible to fear. Okay? You don't want to be eaten. Food, you want to eat something, and reproduction. Everything has a goal. Therefore, the universe has a goal. Everything in the universe has a goal. Aristotle said that the elements had a natural tendency, like earth and water go down, fire and air go up. Well, we don't believe that anymore. We don't believe that universe. But there still is this sense of purpose to all action. If there's no purpose, why are you acting? Well, that's precisely what Newton eliminated with his machine. He eliminated the idea of natural motion, that our actions have a natural tendency toward the good, for example, and everything became violent motion. That's what the scholastic called it. In other words, violent motion means if I take a rock and I throw it up in the air, I'm pushing that rock in the absolute opposite direction of what its natural tendency is, and the rock realizes that, and it comes down after that. All of that idea has been eliminated from the universe. Now, that has economic consequences, and I think it grew out of the situation in England, which is basically you had a natural or an England that was based on nature, the nature of man. We could call that Catholic England. Then there was the Reformation. The Reformation was violent motion. Newton's Principia is in many ways a justification of violent motion. It is saying that all motion is violent motion. If all motion is violent motion, then there's no natural motion. If there's no natural motion, then the person on the throne is there for one reason and one reason alone, and that is violence or force. Force becomes the ruler of the universe at this point. And that is, I think, the logic of the Reformation. And it's the logic of the Glorious Revolution. So Newton obviously went through the Glorious Revolution. He was there in England at this time. And so you had the natural hereditary monarch. Well, it turns out he's a Catholic. Can't have that. Because we're all living in stolen Catholic property. So I know, we'll put someone on the throne. We'll get this Dutchman, King Billy the Dutchman, and we'll put him on the throne. And that will be violent motion, but that's not wrong.
All motion is violent motion. So what's the difference, right?
If everything's violent motion, then why not put a usurper on the throne? And if everything is violent motion, then why not grind the worker? You see what the corruption that this brought in. And once you have violent motion, then if everything is violent motion, how is providence part of human history?
Right.
Providence is eliminated because you've got a machine that is the source of all motion, and all motion is violent motion.
And you mentioned as well that this thinking, because like you said, you take this out, it basically takes God out of the equation, which takes morals out of the equation. And like you said, if all motion is violent motion, well, then it's perfectly normal for the factory owner to just pay the worker subsistence wages. And then that actually leads to Darwin, right? Where it said that's actually good because that helps with competition. And competition being one of the love or the strife that propels everything forward. Can you talk a little bit of who else that we'll say Newton's ideas infected in terms of great thinkers? And well, I mean, like I just mentioned with Darwin.
Well, Darwin,
yeah,
Darwin's a classic example. Except that now everything is strife. Everything is strife, and strife is the mother of all good things. And so you have this natural selection, and that is in many ways the ideology that rules us to this day. And the most recent manifestation of it was the four atheists of about 10 years ago, when they came on the scene.
And who are they?
Well, Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins, what's his name? Stephen Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and who am I missing here? Anyway, there are four of them.
Sam Harris?
Yeah, that's right. Sam Harris. He's the other one. Okay. And they were all Darwinists. And the whole point is they are coming up with this metaphysical Darwinism, metaphysical biology, which is preposterous. And it's and the really funny thing is they don't understand how preposterous their own theories are. So Dawkins, the only philosopher among these guys was Dennett, and he came up with what's got to be one of the stupidest statements in the history of philosophy, where he said, the universe created itself out of nothing or something very small. What are you talking about? First of all, can the universe create itself out of nothing? Well, that means that the universe has to exist before it existed. Explain that to me, will you?
Right.
And then secondly, out of something very small. Well, wait a minute. If it's something, then something exists. Then there's nothing. There's not nothing. And they don't understand fundamental metaphysical principles that were articulated hundreds of years before Christ. Parmenides, for example, said, that which is cannot come from that which is not, which is the ultimate refutation of Darwinism, which says that which is comes from that which is not. Well, so Dawkins is trying to think, now let me try to explain this. How does this happen? Let's take an eye. Darwin was really puzzled by the eye. It's really complicated. So it came from, this is Hitchens now. There were some organisms that had light-sensitive cells. Oh, well, that's just light-sensitive cells. You add evolution, you shake it up, and you get the eye. Well, wait a minute. These light-sensitive cells either can see, in which case they are already an eye, in which case this is a tautology, or they cannot see, in which case they will never become an eye, because that which is cannot come from that which is not. And they are too stupid to understand their own argument, the futility of their own argument. That's Darwin. Thanks to Darwin.
Any other
Dawkins said the same thing about Dawkins said the same thing about the wing. The wing. Okay. The wing is that which enables flight. So Dawkins, the genius, says, well, 49% of a wing is better than nothing, right? Well, wait a minute. We're talking about how the wing came into existence. If it's 49% of a wing, it's a wing, which means you're already begging the question here.
Where the wing come from? Yeah.
Where did it come from? Where was this thing that did not, how did you get from the point where it could not fly to where it could fly? You can't get there by little steps. It's one or the other. Okay. It's that they couldn't figure this out.
Can you? It's turtles all the way down.
I gave that argument to an Indian. I asked him what had an internet conversation with an Indian. I said, well, what's the turtle standing on? He couldn't answer the question. And because he couldn't answer the question, he converted to Catholicism. So don't ever say people don't convert because of philosophical arguments.
Wow.
Yeah, I would definitely not say it, especially after hearing that.
No.
Can you talk a little bit about, I want to talk about how alchemy and Cartesian philosophy led to Newton coming up with this idea of they're contradictory, like you mentioned in the book, but this idea of the attractive force and the strife force. However, you mention that there's never any explanation as to how, why, what gravity is and how, why, what inertia is. It's just there. Newton, when asked about it, he goes, "Hey, man, I don't know." And the fact that it's just there isn't metaphysically a good explanation. And because we have this bad metaphysical explanation that won't go anywhere, it like we talked about, it leads into all these other areas. And I just wanted to make it clear for the listener why gravity and inertia, not that we can't make observations about these things, but why gravity and inertia don't have a philosophical standing.
No, they were imported. Leibniz understood this immediately. Leibniz and Huygens both said that Newton was using occult. These are occult forces. In other words, you've got angel. Here we're talking about angels. Basically, you're talking about some type of being that pushes things and does things like that. Except you're giving them all the scientific names to something that were basically occult. Okay, occult goes back to alchemy. So you had the tradition of English thought, of philosophy in England, was John Dee. That was magic.
Mm-hmm.
John Dee was the guy who worked for the CIA. He worked for Walsingham, trying to ferret out spies for Queen Elizabeth. And he talked with angels. He actually, and his manuscript, John Maynard Keynes found this manuscript. It just kind of blew holes in the English philosophical tradition. But that was the main tradition. And so it was passed on from John Dee to Robert Flood. And then Flood got into a debate with Father Mersenne, who was the promoter of Descartes. And he just obliterated him, just destroyed him. And at that point, the Cartesian philosophy became the dominant philosophy in Europe, and England became a backwater of basically magicians. That's what they were. And so what you had was Newton coming along out of the alchemical tradition because of the Royal Society. That's what it was. And taking Descartes and kind of combining them and sanitizing them with scientific mathematical explanations and disguising their occult properties.
Mm-hmm.
And that's by what I'm saying. And by occult properties, I'm saying agents who act on their own, which we would have to call angels. And that's what gravity is. It's love. It's a force in the universe. Now, you could say Dante believed in gravity. He believed that gravity was love. And he believed that God was love. Well, I got that from St. John, right? So that is a way of introducing agency into the universe, but that's not Newton's way. Newton's not interested in that. He wants a machine. He wants a machine based on violent motion because that's the system that the Whigs want to put in place. And so that was the problem here. That was the problem. And Newton pressed on the issue when Leibniz pressed him on the issue. He couldn't explain it. Like, is gravity a part of matter? Is it a characteristic of matter? Well, he didn't want to say that because obviously he's working. It's an angel. That's what he's talking about. So it's not a property of matter, but it seems to be a property of matter. And it seems to the inverse square law seems to be relating to masses. But then again, you've got another problem here, and that's action at a distance, which he also could not explain. So obviously the moon exerts some type of force on the earth. It's called the tides. All you have to do is watch the tides. Tide comes in, tide goes out. It's all based on the moon. Well, how does the moon exert that? According to, this is the other, he basically was an atomist. And so you have atoms and the void. That's what Democritus said. This is the other ancient philosophy that's being smuggled into Christian thought now. So, okay, it's atoms and the void. So there's one atom is the moon and the other atom is the earth, and there's a void between them. Well, the void is another word for nothing. Is there nothing between the earth and the moon? If there's nothing between them, they're touching. Well, they're not touching. So therefore, there must be something. Well, what is it? He couldn't explain it. Class, how do you have action at a distance? He couldn't explain it because of the philosophical presuppositions that he brought to the system. So they ignored it. Just ignored it. How does the moon exert force on the oceans on Earth? How does it do it? He couldn't have any explanation for that.
And that lack of explanation, as we've been talking about, led to multiple different fields of study, economics, being the one that we're talking about here. And this is, I suspected something like this, but again, reading the book and having the conversation has opened my eyes a lot, is that I knew the invisible hand that Adam Smith described was basically a religious argument. I'm not saying it was a good one, but it was a religious argument where he's attempting to ascribe some sort of providence to the market. That the fact that any transaction that happens is good because that's the invisible hand is there guiding and making sure that everything is going okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was just a reflection of what Newton came up with, which is just these occult unexplainable forces. So due to occult unexplainable forces, we need to organize our society like this, and you don't get paid anything. Right?
What's the invisible hand attached to?
Nothing.
Why did he say what? Well, nothing. Well, then how's it supposed to have any power? The only plausible explanation would be that it's the hand of God. Oh, well, at that point, I can understand how the hand of God regulates human history. Well, why did you cut his hand off? Why did you cut God's hand off? Well, because it turns out the rich people are God, because that passage about the invisible hand is talking about wealthy people. It was basically Newton telling the rich that they are God. You are like God, because the way you spend your money enriches everyone. It's like grace. You squander your money, everyone benefits, and that's a substitution for religion. Providence, the real God. It was all, it's a truncation, a hand. You cut off. It's a hand. You got cut off. Yeah. The only thing in the Bible is like this is when the hand of God writes Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin on the walls when, Xerxes is having his banquet. But that hand is clearly attached to God. Here you have a hand that's disconnected from God, and we're supposed to give it God, respect it as if it's the new God.
And so let's get into that. So here we are today. It's 2021. All this stuff is several hundred years old now. Newton's cosmology has obviously been challenged. I mean, specifically once the relativistic and quantum worlds get discovered, and I don't know if discovered is the right word, but they get projected onto the fabric of the universe in order to interpret them. But I feel like the economics from Adam Smith hasn't changed that much since he brought them into existence, and we're still trying to navigate our society based on this compass that kind of doesn't necessarily point north, if you know what I mean.
Well, the fundamental problem here is that you've banished morality from economics. You've made morality subjective, and you made economics, as I said, like physics, which means it's completely objective, a completely objective reality, and we have to subject ourselves to these quasi-objective laws. No, they're not. They're not. They're all made by men, by some men with certain goals in mind, and all of these decisions have some good in mind. It's just that when you start promoting usury, which is what our culture does, you make most people's lives miserable. And that's precisely what happened over this period. It also corresponds to the rise of Jewish control of our culture, because Jews were traditionally usurers. And so over this period of time, the turning point, I think, was 1973, when wages stopped going up. At that point, the credit cards comes into existence to give you the illusion that you have more money than you actually have or earning from your wages. And so there's a burst of consumer activity. Everyone thinks they have a lot of money, and then suddenly the debt burden, the interest burden, starts to bear down on the economy. This was accelerated by the Fed's policy. When Paul Volcker became head of the Fed, he wanted to stop inflation, and so he raised interest rates to 20%, basically meaning that you could put your money in a treasury bill and you could get 20% interest with no risk whatsoever. This killed investment. Saint Bernardino of Siena said, usury kills charity and it kills investment, kills business. Because why should you risk your money?
Yeah, you got free 20% right there.
No, you only have a right to a return if you share risk. This is the essence of Christian investment. If you share risk, it's like in the Bible, the story of the servants. You know, they're given 5 talents, and he went out and invested it and made 100 talents. That's classic risk. Okay, if you risk it in some type of productive venture, there should be no limit to the amount that you can earn, which is pretty much true. The other hand, we have the guy with 1 talent, and what does he do? He buries it. And the guy says, you should have put it in the bank. This is not an endorsement of banking. It's an endorsement of risk-taking. And salvation and money are related in this regard. And the link is labor. You have to invest, take a risk. You start a business and you use that labor to create surplus value, and surplus value is the reward for risk. All of these things have been destroyed by usury. As I said, if you're going to make 20% with no risk, why would you ever risk your money in some type of venture? You wouldn't do it. You don't do it. And that's precisely what happens. So at this point, after the Volcker Fed, they had to strike down usury laws all across, because the government was the biggest usurer around. And at that point, people got used to quick money, making a quick buck. They got away from the idea that labor is the source of all value. And you had this leveraged buyouts in the 80s. You had these orgies of, credit defaults, for all this type of stuff, was just one form of usury after another, which led to the collapse of 2008. It's always going to lead to collapse. But what you have is a fundamental shift in mentality away from the fact that if you want to make money, if you want to create wealth, let's put it that way, you need to use money to promote labor. That's what you got to do.
And this policy of Volcker, ironically, the excuse was to stop inflation, and it didn't do that at all. It only exacerbated inflation. As we talked about on this show, the higher the risk-free interest rate is, the higher the net subsidy to people who already have money in the economy, and they're not doing anything in return for it. So it actually led to inflation rising more and more. The only the only tool to end the inflation at that time was to deregulate the price of natural gas, and that was when prices started coming down.
Yeah, the
interest rates.
Yeah. That was the time of the energy crisis. Nixon disconnected the dollar from gold. At that point, it started to float, and the OPEC, the people decided, well, we're going to start charging whatever the market will bear, and that caused a huge spike in cost to everyone, and so on. But the fundamental problem here is that all of that achievement. Let's say somebody like Henry Ford, the great manufacturing base that America was, the people who understood that labor is the source of value, whatever shortcomings they had, it was all got replaced by basically Jewish get-rich-quick schemes. And we have suffered, and that led to enormous concentration of wealth into the hands of people like Sheldon Adelson and Paul Singer and Bernard Marcus. And those people ended up controlling the Republican Party. And that's the situation we're ruled by oligarchs. We're ruled by money. And labor doesn't mean anything. And representative democracy doesn't mean anything anymore either. That's the tragedy of the situation. Listen, guys, I've enjoyed our talk. I gotta get off. Great discussion. Thank you for having me on.
It's always been a pleasure, Dr. Jones. If got to run, well, thank you so much. And I usually ask if there's any last comment that you have, but it sounds like you got to run, right?
The last comment is go to fidelitypress.org and buy a copy of Barren Metal. Hold that book up there. And you will get the education in economics that you didn't get in college. Okay? I'm still the professor here. I'm the professor, the return of the repressed here. I got this tweed jacket. I'm still the professor. And this will be what you never learned because it's never been written. Because it's based on the writing of Heinrich Pesch, and nobody knows who Heinrich Pesch is. This is Catholic economics. This is real economics. Anyway, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, this has been IRETA TV with Dylan Moore and Nima Majur and our guest, Dr. E. Michael Jones. Thank you again, and thank you for watching.